Believe it or not, we are live. Welcome to Just Two Dads. For those of you that are going to be listening after the fact on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts, this will sound no different to you. To those of you that are used to catching us weekly at 11 a.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live, you're probably wondering what the heck is going on. We had some serious technical issues, as a result of part of those issues, Brian is not with us today. But I have a fantastic guest, and we're really looking forward to it. So welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads. Hold on just a second here, will you? Well, as always, I want to thank everyone that's taking the time to tune in and join us, whether you're joining us live or after the fact. Again, for those that watching us live on Facebook, we apologize. But as always, what I love about us being able to do with this platform is have fantastic conversations with fantastic people and add value to other people's time. I'm thankful for the opportunity to do so. I am thankful for missing Brian here today, but thankful for the opportunity to work with him and try to add value wherever we go. And our guest today is someone who I'm really excited to have a conversation with and to be able to hopefully add some value to her time as well. Please welcome to Just Two Dads, Julie Swanson.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, more than welcome. It is my pleasure. Julie, let's kind of jump right into the way that we, get started is we like to have you talk about, your beginning, where you were born, where you're from and everything of that sort. You're probably just, doing what you know to be doing and don't see yourself as a hero. But as far as we're concerned, those that especially that serve the special needs community are in fact heroes, and all heroes have superpowers that divide, that arrive from their origin or upbringing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, since it plays a role in obviously how you deal with the tasks that are put before you as you serve the community?
Sure. Well, I currently live in Connecticut, and I grew up here. I grew up in Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is the lower half of the state, more near New York City, in a town called Trumbull, which I call humble Trumbull. And I grew up in a time where, we roamed the neighborhoods. I had neighborhood girlfriends and we walked through people's backyards to get to the other houses, and very
simple times.
Simple and innocent, and so lovely when I look back at it compared to, I think, some childhoods today.
Yeah.
My dream was always to be a singer.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wasn't that lovely?
Yeah. Well, go ahead though.
Yeah. No. So my grandfather was a singer. My mother was a singer. In fact, my mother was in the very first Jenny Lind contest. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a Swedish. If you ever watched the movie about what was his name, Barnum and Bailey.
P.T. Barnum, The Greatest Show on Earth. Yes,
right. Thank you, The Greatest Show on Earth, and that was Jenny Lind. My mother was in the very first Jenny Lind contest.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of like what the Swedish version of like Ted Mack's Amateur Hour or something.
Well, I guess so. But anyway, I come from a line of singers.
Gotcha.
And so that was always my dream. And, we used to go over each other's house and listen to records and, Jesus Christ Superstar and things that nobody listens to anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It was pretty idyllic. And, then, of course, when I went off to college, my goal was to, I was in the, Broadway musical theater major. And my minor was in journalism broadcasting. And I quickly realized I'm a really bad dancer. I mean, super bad. So, Broadway was not exactly what I think was going to work out for me. So I sang at clubs and in weddings and always just loved singing. But I ended up working in the field of journalism and broadcasting. I worked in television as a television producer. Then I worked in public relations. And then I met my husband and got married and had my children. And my second child was diagnosed with autism.
How old was he and what year was that?
That was he was born in 1994, so he was diagnosed probably in 1996.
Okay. All right. I asked that because the one thing that Brian and I talk about is, my son Elijah's 16 and was diagnosed at the age of 3. Yeah. And so a parent that faces a diagnosis now has far more resources and is having a diagnosis in a world that is completely different than that of somebody in the 90s. So go ahead and continue and tell us about that.
It's I've always thought that, and it's not that anybody, relishes the idea of, finding out that their child has autism, and not that there's anything wrong with having autism. I don't mean it in that way, but it's unexpected, right? But it was a very different world. I remember thinking I could have stood on the top of my house screaming at the top of my lungs about autism and nobody would care because nobody else was experiencing it. And not only was it a different world with no internet, no social media, but the numbers hadn't started to grow.
So you didn't, so he's diagnosed at 3.
2.
How old? 2. Okay. 2.
Yeah.
How old would you say he was by the time you met another family who had a child with the diagnosis?
Probably around 3. It was a local family, but they were the only other ones I knew.
So it was at least a year before you met even one other person.
You're right. Right.
Wow. And that probably had something to do with obviously the time, but then how much of that do you think was affected by where you were geographically too, in a small town?
Probably had something to do with that. Right. And, I remember my mother used to always say to me, Julie, you should write a book. I'm like, who's going to read this book? Nobody cares. Well, aren't we in a very different place today?
Yeah, aren't we? Yeah. It's like, who hasn't written a book
today? So, no internet, no social media. I had to do everything the old fashioned way to, we had phone books back then. Right. And I think my phone bill was like $550 the month that I had to do my walking through the yellow pages and, to try to figure out who could help because I had to call other states. I ended up putting a home ABA program together for him in the basement and had to recruit board certified behavior analysts from Rutgers down in New Jersey.
Okay, hold on a second. Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on.
All right.
That is fantastic because you don't just wake up one day and then decide, you know what? And for those of you that are of a younger age, when Julie says walking through the yellow pages, she's referring to a book. It's a phone book for businesses. And that was what the ad looked like. There were fingers that were walking. You walk through the yellow pages. But you don't wake up one day and just go through the book and then, you know what? There's this thing called ABA. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start a program on my own and recruit people. Because the other thing that we talk about from time to time, because this is what Brian and I work in financial services and specialize in bringing financial service and education and opportunity to the special needs community. So we're always talking about with other people, how can you take your challenge and maybe turn that into a service that you earn income on and things like that. So whenever somebody does that, that's the classic example of making lemonade out of lemons. So we want to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity to inspire somebody that might be sitting at home trying to figure out, what do I do, as they're trying to strike a balance between earning income and then being there for their child. So you had worked before. You were not an entrepreneur beforehand. So so the diagnosis takes place. You're calling these people. How do you bridge the gap for me, if you can, between making all these phone calls, finding out what ABA even is, and then starting the program and recruiting people?
Well, my father, after I found out that my son had autism, and I did go through a period of what I would consider mourning. I cried for an awful long time.
Yes.
And then one day I just woke up and I said, now it's time to get busy. Like, I can't do this anymore. But I let myself do that. Right. And, I live in a very small state. So you you end up meeting people and making connections. And I don't even remember how, but I found out about a woman down in Fairfield County who started an ABA school, an
Mm,
applied behavior analytic school.
okay.
Don't even ask me how I found out about it. I don't know.
Right. You don't
But
remember.
I was doing so much networking, and she was starting a school. And I said to myself, I've got to get him into that school. I've got to get him into that school.
Yeah.
And I, one of the reasons that I became an advocate is because my school district was not providing an appropriate program. We asked for an out of district placement. They said no. We hired an attorney,
Mm-hmm.
and I was my attorney's
Liaison.
partner through this
Yeah.
whole thing.
Right.
There's no better way to learn about the law than going through a due process hearing. It
Right.
is a boot camp in learning about the IDEA and how to advocate for your child.
Mm-hmm.
And so, gosh, I forget where I was in your question, but how do you
The
make that?
gap, the gap between the yellow pages and starting the program. So what kind of stuff did you find out as you're making these phone calls in the yellow pages? And what are you
Well,
looking under? Because ABA isn't.
no, I didn't look under ABA. I had found out about ABA from talking to other parents,
Mm-hmm.
then found out we had nobody. There was not one single board certified behavior analyst in the entire state of Connecticut. Not
Wow.
one. And I learned through Suzanne Letzo, who started the school, Connecticut Center for Childhood Development, now Milestones,
Mm-hmm.
that I needed to really be getting in touch with Rutgers.
Right.
And at that time, her school was just starting and he wasn't in yet. So I started a program until the school was officially up and running and I could get him in and I could win this due process hearing.
Right.
And so we hired these folks from Rutgers who came up and started the program for us
Now, when you say hire them, that means that you
at our own
take out a
personal
loan,
expense.
started a business, and you were paying these people.
Well, you know, how can I put it this way? When my kids were younger, like let's say 4 and 2, I had always thought I was going back to work. But
Right.
when I was very fortunate at that time that my husband was in a job where I could stay home.
Right.
My intent was always to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
But thankfully, he was in a position where he was able to pay for these things.
Right.
And we borrowed money from our parents. And
Right.
because at one point we were paying $5,000 a month for attorney and $5,000 a month. At some point, we privately placed him into the private school at
Right.
$5,000 a month.
Right.
So $10,000 a month while we were in the due process hearing.
Mm.
And I realized not every person can do that. We borrowed a lot of money and we put a lot on the line. It was
Right.
blind faith. It
Right.
was, we're just going, we're taking the leap.
Right. Right. So there's two things I hope that everybody can hear and
Yes.
have it caught, not taught, and catch that, which is number one, you do what you have to do, right?
Right.
There's always a way when the will is great enough, when the reason is great enough. And then the other thing is that, anybody that's sitting at home, just by virtue of the fact that you're going through a diagnosis in this day and age, as opposed to the 90s, you might not have the financial resources, but you have odds in your favor just by virtue of when you're going through your challenge. And then the other thing that I wanted to highlight, just based on what you said, again, is the importance of, the financial piece. That's a whole nother story, even though that's the area that,
Right.
that Brian and I
Right.
work in, but it's another reason why those things are important, making the most out of your dollars and putting them to work for you as opposed to the other way around. So you're scraping, doing what you can, and you start to hire these people, and then where does that go from there?
Well, it was probably we were also engaged at the same time in a due process hearing, and it was probably one of the most stressful times of my life because it was financially draining, it was emotionally draining, it was time sucking.
Mm-hmm.
I woke up every day like I was in a fight, in a battle. And I was, because you either win a hearing or you don't.
Yeah, you can't be the same person. And the other thing I was going to say too is that what's interesting is, you know, not to make an excuse for a school district, because there's still things that, you know, they deny to our families today. But another thing, going back to the time period, again, this is for people that are facing something now. The school district at the time is responding to that which they know. We're all the sum total of our experiences. So they're inexperienced with that as well. Just because they're a school district and a board and these highly educated individuals, they don't know what they're dealing with. So they're answering and responding to and not serving you out of ignorance versus knowledge.
So I'm going to tell you a story. I didn't even, you know, when I was preparing for this, I didn't even think about telling you this story.
Okay.
So, you know, we asked for an ABA program. What's ABA? You know,
that was their response.
They didn't even know. Okay.
Yeah, see? That's my point.
And we have a fine program.
Right.
Okay. Ended up, you know, hiring an attorney, making a very long story short. We ended up finding out when there was some sealed documents that there was a piece of paper, a note on it. And on the note, it was by the school psychologist. And at the time, it was in the margins of the paper. It was just notes in the file. And anytime a child's in a file, what can be discovered is if it has the child's name on it, that's discoverable, right? And it had my son's name on it, and that's Alex.
Right.
And it said, what if this child is not autistic and the mother is seeking attention? Yeah. So you want to talk about getting a fire in your belly about something.
I don't even know what kind of attention one would be seeking in that
case.
It's
that Munchausen by proxy syndrome, or the cold mother, the refrigerator. Do you know the refrigerator, the refrigerator mother theory?
No, I don't.
So the prevailing thought in the 50s and, you know, prior to modern day was that children had autism because their mothers were cold, and it was called the refrigerator mom syndrome.
Oh my gosh, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's, you know, when I looked up my son's, I had to look up autism in a set of 1950s encyclopedias at my library.
So you had to, so the only resources you had, and I know we keep going back to this, is so funny because we've had people, well, Brian is an example, even though his daughter's condition, her diagnosis was not autism, we're still talking about, we often talk about people being diagnosed, you know, in the 90s. The same thing took place with Holly Robinson Pete when she was on here. But you're talking about, it just keeps coming up here. This story is a little different. And you're talking about, again, no internet, and the only resources are encyclopedias, and those are based on things that are written in the 1950s.
50s, right. Yeah. And they were read. I'll never forget it. And it, you know, it basically talked about the refrigerator mother syndrome. And I'm sure that this was the premise on which the school psychologist was dealing, you know, that there was something wrong with me.
Right.
And to make the long story short of what happened in our hearing is, you know, on the first day of school, when all the teachers come back, I don't know why they call it a convocation. It sounds very Catholic schoolish.
I was just going to say, yeah.
But it's called the Convocation Day. And the superintendent gets up and speaks to everyone. Now, I had known someone from town who worked in the school district, because my son was in the public school for a hot minute. And she knew that we had gone to due process. She was, you know, someone I knew. And the superintendent got up and talked about a very difficult family who had taken the district to due process, and they have a child who has autism. And she called me up and she said, Julie, they were talking about you and your family at the convocation today. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? And I called up my attorney and I told him, he said, Julie, they just did you the biggest favor. And because they had breached our confidentiality, and even though they never said our name, it gave enough information for people to figure out who they were talking about.
Because there was nobody else in the town.
Nobody else.
Right.
No, nobody else.
Yeah.
So my attorney called up the school district's attorney and basically said what happened. And they said, what would you like? And my son was placed at the private school. I also got 10 hours of home services a week,
Which is
and
unheard of back then.
unheard of. Unheard of. Now, remember, this is before insurance. So there was,
Right.
there was no like, let's just have insurance pay for home services.
Right.
And he stayed at that school all the way through. He was 21 years old.
Wow. How old is he now?
He's 27. He'll be
Wow.
28 next month.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so the point of that story is things have really changed, right?
Right. The point of that story is that things have really changed. You got to have gratitude for what you have, and you got to fight.
Oh yeah, and after that hearing was over, it took me about I had aftershocks for about 3 months. It took me 3 months to not wake up in battle mode.
Sure, I'm sure the stress, there's got to be some PTSD with something like that.
Oh, absolutely. And one day I just said, well, I guess I'm not fighting anybody anymore. He can just go to this school that's appropriate for him.
Yeah.
And it ended up being the best thing in the world for him.
Wow. So you were almost like some of these Japanese soldiers they talk about that are on these outlying islands that 20 years after World War II is over, they're still fighting because they don't know that the war is over.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Wow.
So anyway, to continue on, because I had gone through this experience, now, as time goes on, the numbers of the incidents of autism are rising.
Are increasing. So let me ask you this. So how long did that battle take place, from the beginning of the due process to finally them, quote unquote, screwing up, putting their foot in their mouth and really doing a service for others without realizing?
8 months.
8 months. So that's 8 months. In that time, did you start the program at home with the people from Rutgers University during that time or after?
Yes. Before and during.
Before and so okay. So there you go. That's a full plate with another plate on top of it as a chaser, so to speak, because you're talking about dealing with due process and then having this program at home. So the program at home, how many hours, how many days a week at home was this taking place?
I had 2 employees, probably about 30 hours a week.
30 hours. Wow. 30 hours a week. Now, had you guys gone through and started like formally, an LLC and things of that sort? Okay.
No.
Okay. You just started, and how did that happen? So how do you even reach out? I'm sorry, I'm all over the place.
It's okay.
How do you reach out to Rutgers? Just call one day and say, look, I want to start an ABA program. I want to hire some people that you have. Do they know what ABA is? How do they respond?
Right. So Suzanne Letzo, who is very well known in the ABA community, she is a mover and a shaker who started the school Milestones, which was CCCD, Connecticut Center for Child Development in Fairfield County, Connecticut.
Okay.
Is very connected.
Gotcha.
And she's the one who said, you've got to call Rutgers. You've got to call this person. So I was fortunate because she knew I wanted to come to the school. But in the meantime, I still had to provide Alex services.
Right.
And do some heavy duty intervention.
Okay.
So anyway, the numbers start to rise, and I realized that all these people started calling me because people, just through, me getting to know other people, and I actually had met a group of people and was on I was one of the founding board members of Connecticut FEAT, which is the Families for Effective Autism Treatment. And, met people, a bunch of folks through that. And people started finding out that I was one of only 2 people in the state of Connecticut who had taken their districts to due process over ABA and prevailed.
And won, right.
So I was sort of like this local, hero person for getting ABA services.
Back up again. You said you were one of how many people?
2.
So only 2 people had even dared to take them on, and you were, and of those 2, you were the only one that had won.
No, the other people prevailed as well.
Okay.
But I prevailed, and that news gets around because everything back in those days was no, hang up the phone. No, we don't do that. We don't have that.
Right.
So
Wow.
who is this person, Julie Swanson, who, you know, got these services and how did she do it? So parents, now the numbers keep rising and I'm getting so many phone calls and I was getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, of course, a lot of time condensed. And I thought, wait a minute, maybe I should go back. Maybe I should start a business. I'm actually helping people and
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I kind of like it. It's very fulfilling.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of emotional currency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can do this. And I was very fortunate at that time, you know, when people become advocates, you don't increase the, you know, you don't get to a point where your phone is ringing off the hook overnight. But I was
No.
very fortunate in that while my kids were young and while financially my husband wasn't, my whole household wasn't just depending on me, right?
Right.
That I was able to gradually grow this business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and you know, and it grew, and I've been doing it for 20 years plus,
Wow.
20 plus. Yeah,
Wow. Wow.
I'm old.
So let's see. So you've been doing that for 20 years. So today, do you operate out of the home? Do you have a facility? How does that work?
I'm in my office as I speak,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to travel all around the state of Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
and then the pandemic came.
Right.
And I don't travel anymore. I do everything virtually, which
Oh,
is
okay.
really nice. Um, but anyway, you know, I liken to what happened, you know, after my son was diagnosed, and I sort of became passionate about disability issues. Is I reinvented myself,
Right.
right?
Which is another thing we have to always be willing to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was going to go back to work either in television production or in public relations. Those are the two
Mm-hmm.
things that I did. And I, my new passion became, you know, just helping families who have kids with autism. And
Right.
actually, when I started out advocating, directors, a lot of directors of special education didn't respect me at all. Like, you know, and by the way,
And
I
this is
only
and this is
knew,
because you didn't have the right credentials and that kind of
right,
thing, correct?
right,
Interesting. That's something else that we talked about in terms of
yeah,
how we turn our nose up at people that don't have the right,
right,
credentials or whatever have you. It's funny, just like when it comes to business, a person that teaches business at a university, you're talking about the highest learning institutions in the country, is not required to have succeeded or even failed in an attempt to have run a business. But yet that person will be quick to judge you when you actually go out there and try
yeah.
and do it. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I, oh gosh, what was I saying? I have a terrible brain, by the way. Sometimes it just goes whew, right out the
It's
window.
okay. I can relate.
Um, no, I, oh, what was I saying?
We were talking about them not respecting you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Mhm.
um, and I decided that I was going to go back to school. Now, this is I've got an undergraduate degree in journalism broadcasting. I have a graduate degree in educational media, and I went back to school and got a secondary degree as a disability specialist
Wow. Okay.
at a community college. I have
Mhm.
great respect for community colleges, by the way. That's a whole other subject.
Yes.
And I thought, well, isn't this going to make a difference that I'm a disability specialist? I could say, well, I'm a disability specialist. Didn't make any difference
Any
whatsoever.
difference. Right. Right.
So I just realized that I had to sort of own who I was and just hold my head high and not let these folks bother me when they tried to challenge me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
thankfully, nobody challenges me anymore. So, but when I started as an advocate, I only knew of two other advocates in the entire state of Connecticut. And now there's probably hundreds of them. So,
That is something else. That's something
yeah.
else. I so relate to that because um, I've been in financial services for 16 years.
Hmm.
September will make it 16 years.
Hmm.
The initiative and the special needs initiative is only maybe 5 years old because
Hmm.
I some of it was in my head, but you same time you run into people with, well, what experience do you have? Do you have the right this? Do you have the right that? And when it comes to care for our community and, and our families, there's a higher level of care that does need to come into play. But for anyone that's out there that wants to create a business where they want to serve people, whatever, any fear that you might have about doing that, I want to encourage you to find out what that is. And if you know that your intentions are good, and you know that you're passionate about what you're doing, and if you know that there's real value and a real difference that you can make in other people's lives, go do it.
Plow ahead.
It's okay to be afraid, but it's not okay to allow that fear to prevent you. And I say that from experience, because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what if somebody, if somebody questions my intention, I just don't know if I could deal with that. I don't know if I can handle that. We have these solutions that help them out, protect them against loss of income, the right amount of life insurance, retirement, debt elimination, estate plans, wills, trusts, all these things. But at the same time, if they question me, I just don't know. And this is more factual than it is religious or spiritual. But I got to thinking, people don't believe in, there's people that don't believe in Jesus. There's people that if you're Muslim, you believe that Jesus is a prophet. And if you're a Christian, you believe that he's the son of God. But the one thing that nobody disagrees upon, even atheists, is that his intentions were good and the very best. And as good as his intentions were, he was still questioned to the point of death, right? And so if he's going to be questioned to the point of death, right, then as mere mortals, then how can you dare expect for people not to question your intentions when you step forth to do anything that is going to make a difference? If you don't want any challenges in life, sit on the couch. Don't attempt to do anything good, much less great. And that's the way I even look at the technical challenges we've had today. People say when you dare to do something great, the adversary, where there's just the difficulties in life, or the devil himself, whatever the case, you're going to be faced with challenges as soon as you dare to stand up and rise. So I'd like to believe that those are the things that are just par for the course. And that's why we face some of this stuff that we did today, and that people always will. So, so you're where you are now. At what point did you take your mom's advice and decide, well, maybe I am going to write a book? And tell us about that.
Well, and just a little bit before that, because I did miss one little thing. My new dream, because I always wanted to be a singer, was when I went back to school to become a disability specialist, I fell in love with assistive technology and with the issues and trends that affect people with disabilities.
Right.
And so the sort of the person in me who was a television producer, I said, I'm going to go and public relations. I'm going to go pitch myself on local news.
Excellent.
And I'm going to start pitching products that help people with disabilities. And I have all the footage of me actually doing that. Right.
I would love to see that. We had a guest on maybe 2 weeks ago who was talking about the idea of, she is sort of a one-stop shop. So in other words, her business is kind of like the answer. My child's been diagnosed. Now what? And she's that bridge. And she said that she had to get to a point where she was comfortable with the value that she brings, where she had fellow autism parents that were like, you shouldn't be charging for what you do and making money off of it. And like, it's very interesting the way that we think.
Well, it is very interesting because when you say that word disability, everybody thinks of charity, right? And it should be charitable,
right?
But you're still providing a service to people, right?
Yeah.
So I actually had went to all the local stations. They all knew me. They let me come on. And until one day, the place that I used to work at, the producer came up to me and said, Julie, we did a survey and our audience isn't interested in disability issues. Now, back in the day, I don't disbelieve that.
Right, because of the definition of disability.
Right. Because I was swimming up against the tide here. This was, talking about disability still made everybody very uncomfortable.
Right.
And I thought, I think I'm just ahead of my time here. And I can't continue to get, beat down. So it's important that I tell you that, because it sort of led to who I am today with the life skills lady, right?
Sure, sure.
So, because I never let go of wanting to do that. But
Mhm.
then I said, okay, I'm just going to do this advocacy thing. And I always wonder, while I just had my head buried doing advocacy for 20 years, guess what happened? Social media started, all these things that I had no part of.
Right.
And if I had done what I'm doing now when it first started, I shudder to think what I would be a lot further ahead, I'm
Right.
sure.
It's still
But
not too late though.
I hope not. I hope
No,
not.
it's not. It's never
So,
too late.
right. So, as far as now, ask me that question again. Sorry, Shawn.
See, this is why I can relate, because now I have to hold on. Let me recall and figure out what the question is. No, but really, all jokes aside, Brian and I have talked about this. One of the reasons I'm thankful for the show also is because it's allowed me to look at my own experience in terms of the way I process things. And I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I've been seen by all kinds of people growing up because, I was never mentally present in a classroom. So good grades and I are not,
Are
not the best of
are
friends,
not well acquainted.
not at all. But amazement and being baffled is something that people would be very acquainted with when speaking with me, because they wouldn't speak to me and feel like, oh, this kid is a genius, but they would think that
Well,
he's too smart for those things to take place. So I think we were talking about where the book may have come in.
oh, yes. So along this way, life is very funny. When I worked with my attorney, his name was William Laviano, and he was a wonderful, brilliant attorney who is unfortunately no longer with us.
Mm.
And on one of the hearing dates, he said, look, I can't be here, but my daughter, Jenny, who just literally last week graduated from law school, is going to be your attorney during the hearing. And my husband and I were like,
What?
uh, we're not so sure about this. And he was quite the character,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he was so offended by us being even, questioning him. He ripped up our check,
Oh my
and,
goodness.
and we called his daughter who worked in the office, and she's like, oh, Julie, don't worry about it. So we're like, all right, well, we are going to accept Jennifer. We bow at your feet because we need this process to continue. He was
Hmm.
a character, loved him,
Yeah.
but he was one of a kind. And Jen ended up becoming one of my best friends of all time. She's a great,
Wow.
yeah, and we're partners on many projects.
That's
And
fantastic.
I she's one of the best attorneys here in the state of Connecticut for special education,
Hmm.
and she's wonderful. And we always wanted to write a book, and the first thing we didn't do that in the beginning. The first thing we did is, because I'm a pain in the neck and I can't get away from my sort of television production roots, I said, Jen, now again, this is no social media. Let's create a website where we do have digestible explanations of the law, because it's very
Mm.
overwhelming as a parent to read it and try to interpret it.
Right.
So we started a website called yourspecialeducationrights.com,
Okay.
and it's still there. And
Hmm.
we produced hundreds upon hundreds of videos on understanding your rights, which of course now people just do on social media.
Right.
And so after that, we'd never made any money at any of this, by the way. And after that, we said, you know what, let's write that book, but we need to write a book that no one else has written.
Right.
So we wrote a book, a companion book called Your Special Education Rights, What Your School District Isn't Telling You.
Mm.
And it's not a school bashing book. We're
Hmm.
big supporters of the public school system.
Right.
But let's be honest, school districts don't tell parents everything. And this is really the book this isn't the book about, God bless rights law, because thank God I have two rights law and I live by the rights law book.
Right.
That's the Bible of special education.
Hmm.
That's already been written. So we wrote this very user friendly, what is your school district not telling you and what do you need to do book.
Right.
And that's been out for, let's see, about 5 years now.
Wow.
And we don't make any money on that either, by the way. but that's
Right.
okay.
Right. Right. And and that's fantastic too. I mean, and it's important. I think that when you put people before your profits take care of themselves anyway.
Right, right,
You know? Yeah. So
right.
so your special those are the sites. What's and forgive me, you may have just actually said that because I was putting the information in the chat as well. What's the name of the book that you actually wrote then?
Your special education rights,
Mm-hmm.
what your school district isn't telling you.
Okay, and where can that book be found? Can they find that on Amazon?
Amazon.
Anywhere you find books. Okay, wow. That is that's incredible. So tell us now a little bit, if you can, about what business was like pre-pandemic and what it's been like post-pandemic.
Well, interesting. And I don't say this in a braggadocious way, but I've been doing this a very long time. So let's just say that thankfully I have a good solid reputation. So I've never had to advertise or anything. It's just word of
Word of
mouth.
mouth, right?
And my phone has always been quite busy.
Good.
And it had been before the pandemic. And then, of course, the pandemic came and there was radio silence for like, at least a year.
Right.
And my income just went woo, boom, 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 down to nothing.
Right.
And then things started to come back, right? And
Mm-hmm.
parents realized they needed help navigating this, virtual, half school, half virtual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, it started to pick up again. Took a while, but it took up. And now, of course, my phone rings off the hook more than ever now. And I'm all virtual.
Okay, good. The one thing I wanted you to talk about, and I'm trying to look for it here. I'm sorry. There's 10 not
Right,
levels or guides to
right,
life skills. So tell us just a little bit about what got you to focus on life skills specifically, because I think one of the
right.
things that we go through is when you get into ABA and things of that sort, and your child is fairly young, you're dealing with things like um, sensory issues, dexterity, and
Hmm.
their ability to balance, making depending on what the situation is. There may be physical tasks that they're not able to do, and whether it's tying shoes, toileting, all these very basic things. And then as you begin to get towards the middle school or the early years of high school, there's the thought of at some point you kind of get smacked. At least this is kind of our experience, and more my own than my wife. I'm the less brighter star of the two of us. At least that's the way I look at it. But at some point, you're kind of like, wait a minute, the life skills are important. I don't care about the academic piece, or depending upon where on the spectrum your child
Right.
is, you might be asking, will they go to college? Or you've accepted that they're probably not going to. And at some point you determine how important the life skills are to you. And for some families, it's more of a preference. Where did you decide to focus on that? Or when, I should say, how did that come about?
Well, we didn't have much of a choice when it came to my son. So I didn't really talk much about my son, but his name is Alex. And Alex has autism, but it's accompanied by intellectual disability. He's nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't read. He doesn't write. Having said all of that, he's fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
He's very intuitive in lots of ways. And as my mother used to say, there ain't no flies on him.
Right.
He knows more than you think.
Right.
But let's just put it this way. He's quite impacted by his autism, and he requires a great deal of support on a 24/7 basis. He could
Right.
never be left alone.
Right.
So even though we tried to teach him how to read and all of the things mightily, by the way, at some point you just realize we've got to focus on life skills. This has to be what we have to focus on, right? And we shifted, which doesn't mean that we gave up on everything else. It's just that was going to be the wheelhouse that he was in.
Yeah.
And so from very beginning, I was very focused on life skills. But being an advocate, I also work with a wide variety of students who are higher on the spectrum and are incredibly intelligent. And in my practice, what I saw way too often, okay, was school teams and parents unwittingly and sometimes wittingly um, underestimating life skills, realizing that we had this precious little time left in transition years, right, to
Right.
churn out our kids to be successful in employment, and in independent living, if appropriate, and further education and training.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so too many people came to me too late with very little time left. And they'd come to me a lot with kids who were higher on the spectrum, very
Mm-hmm.
intelligent, but they started to realize that, oh my gosh, they're woefully unprepared for the real world.
Right.
So
Right.
this went on for years that I've seen this pattern. And between seeing that pattern and really being quite bothered by it, and also my love for assistive technology and the issues and trends that impact people with disabilities, I realized that life skills was the missing component to some of these kids who end up exiting special ed and then end up after a while dropping out of whatever they thought they'd be successful in, whether that was a job or college.
Right.
Basically, the saying, living on your parents' couch in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, and there's not a lot of research, Shawn, on young adults with autism, because let's face it, we're living through the first sort of generation of kids becoming adults, right?
Right.
So we sort of have a paucity of research, right? But there is research that shows, and this is really behind the mission of the Life Skills Lady,
Mm-hmm.
intelligence and academic abilities do not
Mm-hmm.
predict how well children and students with autism do in adulthood, but
Mm-hmm.
life skills do. Life
Wow.
skills predict how well you do.
Right.
It's
Right.
almost, you were talking about yourself not having the best grades, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
bet you had grit, and I'll bet you had stick-to-itiveness and lots of other things that help people become successful,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
I look at myself as a student. I was pretty much a C student my whole life until I went to, graduate school to become a disability specialist because I was so passionate about it. I got, for the first time in my life, straight A's.
Mm.
But as my father has always said about me, Julie, you're a take charge gal. And my father's 99, and so not many people use the word gal anymore, but he always called me a take charge
Good
gal.
charge, gal.
Yeah. So he said in his slacks with his stocking feet on, sitting on the divan. So anyway, my point is I've never been the brightest bulb in the bunch either, but I'm pretty much I'm the kind of person I don't like to take no for an answer, and I just keep on plugging.
I'm so glad you said that, and not wanting to take no for an answer, because it's what's not important is what we think matters, but what matters more is how we think. So and lots of times, we unfortunately use grades to measure
Right.
intelligence and things of that sort. So again, as I mentioned, our son is 16.
Yeah.
He's diagnosed at 3. So talk, if you will, about, because when we were preparing for this for your visit with us here today, we talked about some things. I had never heard of the 3 domains and 10 categories as it relates to life skills. Why don't you tell us about that?
Right. And it's really the 3 domains and the 10 subdomains. I'm going to grab something here.
Go right ahead.
This is my life skills, get to know life skills poster.
Okay.
Which is on my website, your special,
okay.
lifeskillslady.com. Okay.
Okay. And that's and for those that are looking, joining us on Facebook, that's actually on there, as well as the Amazon page where the book can be found too.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So there are the 3 domains are practical life skills,
mm-hmm.
social skills, and conceptual skills. Now, most people highly underestimate social life skills, and so most people think that life skills are, hygiene and being able to make a sandwich, essentially. Can you get something to eat in the kitchen?
Exactly. Yeah.
But
Which matter, but that's not everything.
it would matters greatly, but
Yeah.
there's all these other things on the wheel. So want me to go through it real quickly for you?
Sure, please do.
Okay. So our practical life skills are, self-care. That's all the hygiene, grooming, etc. Then
Mm-hmm.
there's home or school living, maintaining the place in which we live, being able to, fix something if it breaks, but basically, taking care of the space we live in. Then there's community use. That's getting around the community, shopping, being able to avail ourselves of going to the gym or the YMCA and what's in our community, right? Because
Right.
it's so important that people with disabilities are in the community.
Right.
Health and safety. Oh my goodness, this is such a big one. Do you know that
Huge.
so many kids with autism, right, are at higher risk for victimization?
Mm-hmm.
This is about medication management, being able to make your own doctor's appointments, being able to protect yourself. Today, that includes internet safety, social media safety. So many things are in all of these categories.
Yeah.
And then, of course, work. We have to have the skills not only to get a job, but to keep the job. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot harder, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
so that's the practical life skills domain with the
Mm-hmm.
the 5 subdomains. Now, the next one is social skills. So social skills are, just the ability to maintain interpersonal relationships, have conversations, all of those social niceties, fairness, rules. And then leisure skills, another one that's highly underestimated. We want our kids to have a good, healthy repertoire of leisure skills,
Mm-hmm.
whether that is, there's too much of this these days. We know that, right?
Right.
And Game Boy or what I'm see that's how old I am.
No,
You know,
it's a different device, but a same
same
thing.
thing.
Yeah,
Right.
same thing. Yeah, yeah.
But whether it's doing puzzles, walking, swimming, hiking, reading, having a nice repertoire of leisure skills. And
Mm-hmm.
the third domain, which is the most challenging for our kids with autism, are conceptual skills, because this requires us to apply insight, which can be very difficult for many kids on the autism spectrum. So
Yes.
communication, that's the ability to understand verbal and nonverbal language, and listening. These are sort of, it's kissing cousins to social skills. Communication
Right.
and social go together.
Right.
Functional academics, the ability to understand elapsing time, um, money management, all of the functional academics that we need.
I've never even heard that term before, but it speaks to me because, at my age, I think of physical fitness and everything. When you're younger, your physical fitness is based on maybe how you feel after a workout, but a big part of it is how you look too. Do you
Yeah.
have are you ripped? Do you have the right muscles and all that kind of stuff? But what should apply then, which you learn about later on, is functional fitness. Do you get up from a chair,
Right.
a sitting position, with relative ease? Now that your body's aged, you get in and out of a car, okay.
Right.
So working out for that purpose of it. So when you talk about functional, did you say functional academics, or what was the term?
Functional academics. So it could be our financial literacy as an example.
Right. Again, which is not only up our alley in terms of just the planning for the future, but that's the part of the life skills. So in other words, not the academics that, little Bobby got an A in so and so, but being able to apply it. Like, for instance, who uses algebra in general life? Nobody.
Right. And
Right.
I am the queen of, I am the worst at math, and I'm the first one to admit it.
Right.
But I have functional math.
Right.
I'm able to get through a day and buy my groceries and, have a bank account and all of that.
Which is what really, really matters. Those are the things that matter.
Right.
Well,
And
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and the last one,
Mm-hmm.
which is really tough for so many of our kids, and that is self-direction. That is making choice, problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which can be really difficult, right? Taking responsibility, having emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
These are big.
Where can you be found on social media? We want to make sure we put that on the
So
screen also.
I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, I can't even believe it, and YouTube at Life Skills Lady.
Okay, Life Skills Lady. Okay, so make sure that you look that up and you like, follow, and subscribe.
I would love that.
And for those that are watching us, make sure that you like, follow, share, and subscribe as well on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. But we come to the point in the show where it always goes by so fast. Like they say, time flies when you're having fun. But this is the point of the show where I will generally ask the following question with context, which is, the reason for us being here is to shine a light on those that are helping and serving the special needs community, which serves the general population. And our ability to make the world a better place is greatly tied to our ability or willingness to change ourselves. So if you can, give us just one example of a thought, belief, or philosophy that you held dearly and really believed strongly at one point in time, but no longer believe to be true.
I have to tell you, this question, when I read it, sort of blew my mind because it's very deep.
Yes.
And it could end up in not a very positive answer.
Well, it's the reason, believe it or not, this show is a work in progress. And when we began the show, I came up with it because I always thirst for stuff like that. And people either think I'm a genius or a nut, depending on my conversation and things I say. And so I would just ask the question, and Brian is like, "Oh, I don't like that." Then he eventually says, "You know what? It has some value, and I understand why it makes me uncomfortable is because I'm trying to face the answer myself, but people need context." And it just so happens that we haven't had anybody stumped yet. People are either going to be stumped or they have more than one answer to that. So
I did have more than one, but the one I ultimately chose, and you have to let me finish answering it because I don't want it to come out like a wah, wah, wah,
yeah.
is that dreams come true, right? Because I'm 62 years old, okay? And I've been through a lot in my life.
Right.
And I've worked really hard to try to make my Life Skills Lady happen, 20 years ago, and I ended up having to give it up. And now I'm on my second sort of ideation of it.
You had to give it up at one point. Talk about that really quick, if you can.
Which part?
The fact that you had to give it up at some point.
Well, because, like I said, it was before social media. It was before the internet. And where was I getting? And it was before people were comfortable about talking about people with disabilities.
Right.
So,
right.
I think I'm pretty good, but I'm not that good.
Right,
I wasn't able to break the barrier. And so I've been doing my advocacy for 20 years now. And there's parts of me that I am a little burnt out, but I still do it and I love it. And I'm really trying to now take on the Life Skills Lady and make that dream come true. It's not becoming a singer like I wanted to when I was a kid. But the positive spin I have on this is that even though a lot of my dreams haven't come true, I'm not going to give up.
Right. And before you think of the there's so much value in that. And just, there's a great message of that. And people knowing that dreams do come true. And that's something that there's somebody listening to this that needs to hear that.
Well, and just because you work really hard, they don't always come true. But the thing is, my positive spin on it is you just can never give up.
No. And who you become in the pursuit of a dream is immeasurable also.
Right. And my dreams have changed.
Yeah.
Who would have thunk I'd be, and again, I started the Life Skills Lady over the pandemic. It's what kept me going.
Right.
It was my passion project. And I just, I don't know why I'm so passionate about it. I just am.
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean. Sometimes it's so much a part of who you are that you don't even stop and think about all of that stuff, why it matters. You do what you do. Sometimes that's work in itself, stopping and thinking about it because it's so natural. But I want to thank you for your time. You were going to say something. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say that if people follow me on social media, I do a lot with my son, Alex. And even though he may not have a lot of the skills to have all of these life skills independently, it doesn't matter. And that's the other message I really wanted to share, because not all kids can do all of these to 100% and be 100% independent, but you don't have to be independent at everything. We're
Yes.
all dependent on people, right? And so I feature my son Alex a lot, and I just wanted everybody to think some of these seem very lofty, so you don't have to have everything 100% independence.
And it's funny, I just found myself hit with something that I've never really accepted before, but it's just dawned on me as you're saying that, is the grief that we have when diagnosis takes place, accepting the death of the child that was never
Yeah,
even born and the
right.
acceptance of the child that is, that doesn't go away.
No,
Because every now and then you see a kid playing t-ball or driving a car or doing something, and there is part of you that can't help but stop and think about your child being able to do that.
yeah,
As always, the time goes by so fast. I wish we had more time. Once we do sign off, stick around, if you will,
sure.
Julie. For those of you that have taken the time to join us today, I want to thank you so very much. We've had a great time, and I believe we're going to be doing some work together in the future, Julie, and you guys will be seeing her again, we hope.
That
But I
would be
want to thank
lovely.
everyone for listening, and just remember that no matter where you are, somebody needs to know that you care. They need to know that they're seen. They need to know that they're heard. I want to make sure that I thank the women in my life, as I always do, without whom I would not be. That is my amazing mom, Jen, and my wife, Laura. And for those of you that have taken the time to watch us, we're coming up on our 100th episode. We want to thank you for supporting us, and we will see you again soon. Wherever you are listening or watching, just remember, we love you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.